Well, welcome to our faith discussion today. I'm Steve Hunt, the consultant for prosperity and adventure and a seeker of truth and light. And this is Talk of Christ, Faith, Family, and Adventure. I'm joined today by Joseph Lawless. Welcome, Joe, to our Talk of Christ discussion today. And you have been participating in our open faith discussions with several other participants. This is our first one-on-one interview. But I just want to invite you to introduce yourself and your history, the history of your faith journey, and where you are now in your beliefs and so forth. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thanks. And it's a pleasure to be able to be a part of that panel discussion and to get to know a lot of different people a little bit better. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in that as well. So my name is Joseph Lawless, and I go by Joe. So my story, I guess, my faith journey begins long ago when I was younger. My parents were not really religious at all. My mother was a Seventh-day Adventist, but lapsed. She wasn't really practicing at all. My father was a Catholic, I think by association or by name more than much else. My parents got divorced when I was 2 years old. My father raised me, and then I have a younger brother, 18 months younger than me. And so that's kind of where I started off. And I grew up in California, and Northern California, Bay Area. And living there, it's very diverse, and I met a lot of people from kind of different backgrounds. And probably when I was around 9 or 10, I had some friends that were, I had one friend who was Hindu, one who was Sikh, and one who was Buddhist. And I remember, seeing in their houses shrines, or calendars and things with different pictures on it, and just thought that was kind of interesting. And so I approached my father and asking him, well, what do we believe? And he kind of was taken aback a little bit and said, well, we believe in God. And I said, well, what's God? Who's that? And I think looking back now as a parent, it's one of those moments where you're like, oh, I might have missed something here. So because I was with my dad, and because Catholicism is what he knew, I went into catechism, which is kind of like the LDS version, or the LDS version is seminary, right? I learned the teachings and doctrines of the Catholic Church. And so I went there about 10 years old, went through catechism and received my first Holy Communion. That's when you're able to take of the Eucharist, the wafer and the wine in the Catholic Church, similar to the sacrament and the Latter-day Saint faith. My brother was kind of dragged along because we did things together. And since I was doing that, I might as well teach him at the same time. And I don't think he was too interested at all. My dad worked a lot of graveyard and swing shifts. And so because of that, he wasn't present a lot during the regular, daily hours, morning hours. And at the time I lived with my grandmother, but she was also kind of old and sick. So no one really went to church at all, but I was interested. So I walked a couple blocks to the church for Mass, and I did that for a little while. But again, I was 10 years old, right? And for me personally, in my experience, I kind of felt cold in a sense. And what I mean by that is I didn't really contribute at all, and I didn't get anything in return. And if you're familiar with Mass or the setup of Mass, it's always the same, right? It's a rote presentation, it's the same. The difference might be maybe the father might give a sermon on scripture or something, but the form is always the same. So it kind of got a little bit boring, I guess, after a while. And since I was going by myself, I just kind of stopped going. And I just lived my life, did childish things as a kid, and I started going to a non-denominational church that was just down the street from where I lived. I was probably about 12 or 13 at that point. I had explored a lot of different other faiths, Presbyterian and Lutheran church. I'd gone to Methodist church. I went to a Pentecostal church. I was trying to explore and figure things out and see why they were so in different churches and why they were doing things differently. And what I found were some great people, and I found some great things that informed my thinking a little bit more and what I kind of believed or thought and didn't think. And ultimately kind of aligned with a non-denominational church. So I felt I could hold my own personal views and thoughts of God and be able to worship socially with other individuals. And so
Now,
that's what.
how old were you at this time where you were really visiting several different churches and looking around for some more?
Yeah, I mean, I was young, a preteen, 12, 13 years old. So
Okay.
not really old. And I was limited to churches that were close to where I lived, within, a few blocks or so. And like I said, being in California, there were a few churches within walking distance. And I had friends as well who were members.
You being invited to these other churches to explore them, or were you just going around and exploring them at 12 and 13?
Mainly I was going around and exploring on my own, but I did have some friends that I knew were certain faiths. And so I asked them, hey, can I go to yours? Like I had a friend, Pentecostal, and so I, asked, hey, can I go check this out? And like I said, met good people, learned some good things, and learned things that I was like, well, I agree with this, and other things I was like, I don't know that I subscribe to that.
How were you making any concerted effort in figuring out what you believe and how and what you subscribe to? I mean, what were you measuring that against? Just a feeling, or against something you'd read in the Bible, or what was your?
Fantastic question. So it was predominantly feeling. Did this feel right? It was kind of like, these are things that I kind of learned in catechism. And there are things that when I learned about the Bible and learned about catechism, there were things that just didn't make sense to me. So one of those, which was not necessarily affected by these, but was that the concept of original sin, that I was born sinful and wicked and awful. And, that was something that just, I as a young kid felt I already was insecure about about myself, right, and trying to figure things out. And so it didn't seem very benevolent of a God to already kind of condemn me, or and I didn't want to think that way, I suppose it might be fair to say. But it was based off teachings as well. I didn't in the Catholic Church, praying to saints or to the Virgin Mary, that seemed like that was a little bit off. And so those are some of the reasons why I kind of had left Catholicism, because those things didn't seem consistent with me from what I had learned or read in the Bible. And so that's why I was seeking out other Christian churches. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I find it fascinating that someone at such a young age was thinking, this, first of all, you were attending the Catholic Church and Mass and whatever without your family. It was important enough to you. You had asked your parents, what do we believe, your dad? And then you found that you didn't feel right there at the Catholic Church for various reasons that based on your own research of the Bible, based on your own feelings. But you didn't just stop attending church altogether. It's just fascinating at such a young age that you were thinking to yourself, I should go explore some of these other churches. And with each one, you were examining whether it fits with your own belief and understanding of God and scripture. Almost like your name might be Joseph, but anyway.
Right. Interesting parallel or coincidence. But, I think it's fair to say that I still believe that I am a very spiritual person. When I say spiritual, I mean, I believe that there's a spiritual realm, that there's this metaphysical aspect to life and to us that we don't really know how to fully address or recognize. And, I think that's kind of what guided me, is that was important to me. Also, and maybe in a future video we'll address it. I would, like I said, I had my own insecurities and things that I was dealing with, and focusing on that spiritual side of myself for me allowed me to reconcile my carnal side, right? It allowed me to reconcile my human side and to see that there was more to life. So yeah, I was about 13 years old. going to
Was that
nine
a
to
part of it? I got to ask. I mean, Joseph Smith mentions that his spirituality in part was as he looked for forgiveness of his sins. He felt that he had offended God and wanted to find and figure out how to overcome that guilt and shame. Was that also driving your search for God?
That's a fair question, and I can only go back from here and look back onto that to answer that question. Um, I, I, I'd say that to some degree, sure, that must exist, but I don't think that was the driving motivation or force. But I think that that certainly was a strong part of that, because I didn't know much else. I knew God, or I believed God was good, and that He loved me. And so that was, well, how do I display or show love back to God? How do I express my gratitude, appreciation for what I have? Um, I think I've always been sort of more of an idealist. I've always been sort of more optimistic and positive by nature. And I think that that helped, and that kind of, guided me as well. Um, but yeah, when I was 13 years old, I did actually stop going to church for a while. I spent a couple years trying to figure out different things, and I wasn't ever consistent. I have to make sure that that's clear. I wasn't like I was going to church every single week and I was exploring all these things and I was attending them for weeks on end. Some I did go multiple times. Others I went one time and that was enough. And I just came to this conclusion, or this decision, like, you know what? There seems to be a lot of variations, a lot of different flavors here. People are interpreting or picking up a lot of different things from the scriptures. I don't know the scriptures that well. I think it's important for me to just continue being a good and a kind person. I think that that was, to the golden rule, to be kind to others and treat them the way that I will want to be treated. And so that was kind of the guide for me for a while. And then I turned 14 and started high school. And when I was in high school, I had recently moved. When I was 13, we had moved to a new city. And, I started making friends. Before, when I was younger, I was much more kind of a loner. I was much more introverted. I didn't really socialize, kind of a loner. And then when I moved around the age of 13, I started getting friends and people liked me. And that was kind of weird for me because I hadn't experienced that before. And people wanted to be around me and talk to me and be my friend. And so that was kind of a cool experience. And so again, that social aspect, again, kind of influenced and took over. And, I stopped going to church for a little bit because of that. But when I was 14 and I started high school, there was a girl who had moved, and we had drama class together. She had moved from Ohio and was new to our school. And this is the beginning of the school year. It was like September. So we'd only been in for about a month or so. And anyways, one day I saw her reading. And when I had moved at 13 to this new city and to the middle school at the time that I went to, they had this kind of buddy system, which was really cool. And I had someone who had the same schedule as I did, and they were kind of my friend. They took me under their wing. They, talked to me about the different teachers and this classes, and I had somebody that if I need a study buddy or something, that was available. And I thought that was a really cool model for a school to have. So anyways, this girl who I didn't know, her name was Alicia. I saw her one day at lunch in the quad in the open area, reading a thick book. And so I walked over to her and I asked her if she needed help studying at all. And she was like, "Oh no, that's okay. I'm just reading for church." And I was like, "Oh, that's super cool. I love the Bible." And she's like, "Yeah, me too. I'm not reading the Bible though." And I was taken off guard a little bit because I had, kind of got a little closer glimpse of this, and it looked like the Bible to me that she was reading. I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were a Christian. I apologize." And then she was kind of offended by that, and she looked at me and she's like, I am a Christian. And just this kind of going back and forth and being confused, talking to each other. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. So I don't understand. So you are Christian and you're reading what looks like the Bible, but it's not the Bible. So what are you reading then? And she said, I'm reading the Book of Mormon. And never before in my life had I heard the word Mormon. I knew nothing about Joseph Smith. I didn't know anything about polygamy or the migration west of the saints. I didn't know any of that. And I feel like I should, because I lived in Northern California and a lot of saints had settled there as well. And, but I never learned any of those things. And so I was kind of intrigued. And again, I think I was spiritual. I was seeking truth. I wanted to know more. And so if there was something available to me that would give me more, I wanted to know more about that. And so we spent the remainder of that lunch together, just talking. And I asked her, questions like, well, what's Mormon and what's that? And, how is that not the Bible? And why would you read that? And, a bunch of different questions. And she was great at answering those questions, and then, I was like, well, hey, why don't you come to church with me and I can go to your church. We can kind of, check it out and stuff, and we can kind of compare and stuff. And she's like, yeah, well, I can talk to my family. And she was like, well, our church is like 3 hours. And I was like, 3 hours? Okay. All right, 3 hours. And then she's like, well, okay, so we meet together like in their chapel and we have our service first, and then we split up and we have a Sunday school. And that was kind of typical of my experience of going to other Christian churches. Usually they have, they meet together, congregation, and they have some sort of Sunday school service. So that was fair. And then she said in the third hour, we'd separate off, guys and girls and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, why are you splitting off? But she was like, so, if you come to my church, you're more than welcome to, but, it's a little bit different of a setup. And at that point, another person came over named Daniel, who was friends with Alicia because they went to church together. They were in the same ward. And he kind of joined in the conversation. Daniel is Daniel Woodfield, who's part of our panel discussion. So Daniel Woodfield.
Remind me of the age that all this was happening again. How old in high school?
14, freshman.
Oh, we're still 14. Okay.
Like a month or two into freshman year.
You mentioned that you had stopped, seeking and attending church, but it doesn't seem like it was for very long, a couple of months or so.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a year, maybe 8 months or so. And again, I wasn't like consistently going to church. I was like, periodically going. So I guess in my mind, when I say going to church, I mean, like, was I consistently week by week going? But yeah, so then we had this conversation and Daniel was answering things, and Daniel was like, oh, well, we're in the same age group and stuff. And I actually had a science class with Daniel. So, I had kind of knew him, but I didn't know he was LDS. And it turns out it was the funniest thing that it seemed like Latter-day Saints, Mormons were everywhere. Like they were like cockroaches just crawling, climbing out of the wood. I don't mean that negative or derogatory, where I just didn't realize all these people around me were LDS, and I come to find out, I was like, oh, wait, you're, okay, wait. And I was like, is anybody not LDS here,
Did you have a general impression of these people?
Yeah, absolutely. They seemed like from the month that I knew them in school, they seemed like good people, right? They seemed like kind. They seemed like they were nice and helpful, hardworking, smart. Those were kind of my impressions. So, we're having this lunch period together, and at the end of the conversation at this lunch period, this was kind of one of the pivotal moments that kind of moved me forward. Daniel and Alicia kind of answered these questions and stuff and told me a little bit about their church a little bit. And I was like, okay, that's great. I was like, okay, well, kind of snarky. It's like, well, if you know everything, then, well, what's the purpose of life then, huh? What's that all about? And I really wanted to know the answer to that question. And I felt like there was an answer to that question, but I had asked so many pastors and preachers and men who had studied the Bible their entire lives, devoted their life to the Word of God, who could never give me an answer that I thought it was unanswerable. So I asked her snarky, And I don't know if she went to seminary that morning. I don't know if that's what she was reading earlier on, but she opened her Book of Mormon to 2 Nephi 2:25 and read the scripture, Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. And bore a simple statement that I believe the purpose of our life is to have joy. I find the greatest joy by following Jesus Christ and keeping his commandments. That was it. Super simple, right? It was too simple at first, and I couldn't accept it. I was like, no way. There's no way some 14-year-old girl, she's the same age as me, there's no way that she can answer that question so matter-of-factly, like everybody knows that, when I had asked so many other people who couldn't give me a straight answer. And so that intrigued me. And that idea that Adam fell that men might be and men are that they might have joy kept playing on repeat in my mind. I couldn't, it was like I would just randomly be in class and then that thought would pop into my head. I'm like, get out, or I would be trying to go to sleep and that thought would come into my head and I just wouldn't go away. And as I had mentioned before, one of my biggest things with the Catholic Church was that idea of original sin, that we're all created evil, right? But that idea that Adam, at least in my mind, like Adam needed to do that, was something that I'd never considered before, but kind of fit in more with what I personally felt all those years. Eventually, a few weeks later, I said, okay, I want to come to your church. And she's like, well, I can't go to yours. And I was like, that's fine. I want to know more. And so I went actually to my church down the street, this non-denominational church down the street. I went there first, this particular Sunday, had the service, had Sunday school, and then I met with the youth pastor and I said, hey, what do you know about the Mormons? Oh, Mormons, you better watch out. They're going to get you some, John Smith found a gold Bible in a porta potty. You want to be careful of them. They have horns. And, he was very misinformed.
Did you really say it like that, or are you just sharing some?
He did get the name wrong, and he did mention a gold Bible found in like a porta potty. Yeah, some hole.
Serious? Oh wow.
Yeah. So he was misinformed, but he cared, right? And he sat me down and he said, "Listen, they are a cult, and you need to be aware of them and watch out because the devil has hold of them, and he will get hold of you too." And I just sat there kind of flabbergasted, and I was like, I don't know that that's right. I said, because I have some friends at school that are Mormons, and they seem to be like the nicest people I've ever met. Like, I don't think that that's right. And I said, and also I already promised I was going to do this, and I keep my word. And so I'm going. He's like, well, just be careful. Needless to say, that was the last time I ever went back to that church. So I walked a block or so away from my house into a parking lot near our public library, and Daniel's family drove across town because they actually lived across town and picked me up for church. And it was October 2001. It was fast testimony meeting. I walked into the building and immediately felt very different in a good way than I had felt in any of the other churches. People were nice, they were chatting, they were laughing, they were welcoming. And I had this sensation or this feeling like I was home. And I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I remember walking into the chapel though and being a little bit put off because I was thinking it looked like a courtroom to me, what I imagined in my mind a courtroom would look like. You got this stand and pulpit and you got these men in suits, and I was so that was a little bit of a different experience from what I had before. But I sat down in that testimony meeting and people got up and they bore their testimonies, and at one point I had leaned over to Daniel and I was like, so anybody, is this like open mic, anybody can just go up and talk about Jesus or something? And Daniel's like, yeah. I was like, okay. I was like, well, I'll go if you go. And, I think Daniel wanted to be a good friend and a good missionary. And he's like, yeah, sure, let's go. So we went up to the stand and Daniel for his testimony. And then I followed, and my testimony was very simple. I did not really understand the whole detail of that. I just kind of mechanically was like, okay, like I believe in God, I'll just say that. And so I went there at the pulpit and I just said, hey, my name's Joe, and I'm just visiting, but I feel really good here, and I know that God is true and Jesus is true, and I know the church is true. Kind of I'm paraphrasing, of course, but something along those lines. And then Daniel and I went and sat down, and that was my introduction to the church. I never left. I went consistently from that point forward to that church every week and learned more. Now, like I said, I lived across town, so the scout leader, the teachers quorum advisor was he lived right by that park where Daniel picked me up originally. So he became then my ride and took me to church. But I found out about wards and boundaries and zip codes and how that worked out. Again, something that was a little different to me. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So then I started going to the other church that I lived in, the ward boundaries I lived in. And it was often that I would go to 6 hours of church. I would go to one, and then I would go to the other. I'd go to one more for social reasons, because all my friends were in the ward like that Daniel was in. That's where all my friends were. And the other ward is where I lived. And so I kind of did that.
That's a dedication from an investigator. Geez. 6 hours.
Yeah. Again, I think honestly, it was just the feeling. I couldn't get enough of that feeling, how I felt around these people and in this setting. I couldn't get enough of that, and I wanted to feel that. I remember, going to that church and feeling like I was home, feeling like this warm blanket, and just thinking, I always want to feel this way.
When did the missionaries actually start teaching you? Is that right away?
Yeah, so a couple weeks later, the missionaries came to my home and knocked on my door, and I let them in. Now, my family, they were not too keen on the church. My dad, I would say, politely, was probably a little bit more aloof and didn't know as much, but just knew that it wasn't Catholic. And
did he have problems with all the other churches you've been visiting for years?
No.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, it was. The biggest opponents were my grandparents, my grandfather and my step-grandmother, but she was essentially like my grandmother. They were the biggest opponents. So I met them, but there came a point where my dad said, hey, I don't want the missionaries in my house. I said, okay. And so we would meet up on the porch. And then my dad would say, I don't really want them coming over. And I was like, well, well, why? I mean, they're nice and they're talking about guys. Like, no, I don't feel comfortable. I was like, okay. And then I would go to friends' houses and meet with them there for a little bit. And this went on for a 4-year period. I had started at that point too, attending early morning seminary. We had a seminary starting at like 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning, and I started going to that. And they were studying the Book of Mormon that year too. So that was interesting to me and intriguing, because I didn't know anything about it. And so that really was helpful to me, because I desired to know, I desired to learn. And, I got to really understand more clearly what their beliefs were and what they believed in. That the Book of Mormon, as far as I could tell, really did testify of Jesus Christ. I still have the original Book of Mormon, the paperback copy that Daniel and a couple other people wrote their testimony inside and gave to me. And as well as that year for Christmas, I received a quad containing all the standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from Daniel and a couple other friends. My family was against the church, but I felt strongly that it was home. That's where I needed to be. And so I continued to go, continued to learn. And I learned along the way too. I remember one day outside of the choir room, the piano room, there's a girl there named Michelle, who was Christian, and Daniel and I were there. Daniel had first hour there. He had piano class, and so we would wait because I had that same teacher for choir later in the day. And I remember this girl asking, like, so why do you guys believe that Satan and Jesus are brothers? And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, that's what you believe. I was like, that's not what I believe. He was like, no, you do. I was like, no, we don't believe that. And then Daniel was like, well, okay, that's kind of out of context, but it is kind of right. And then I was like, wait, what? But he explained, he described, it was like, well, we believe that we're all children of God. That would mean that he's included in that. And so, that's one of the reasons in our church why we say brother and sister and whatnot. And, that made sense to me. I was like, oh, well, that's logical. That makes sense. Okay, it's not a big deal, But I was doing all these things. I was going to mutual, early in the morning seminary, all these things, and my family again was opposed to it, and so I read a lot of anti-Mormon literature that my grandparents gave me.
I was going to ask, I've been tossing you some softball questions, but as you dive in here, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, what did you find most challenging, and what was the hardest to believe as you were investigating? Continue with your discussion there.
Sure. So there was a little bit of hardness to believe fully that Jesus Christ did come to the Americas, but it wasn't a huge challenge for me, but that was just something that was kind of interesting. Polygamy was a huge issue for me that I didn't understand.
Were you learning these things from the anti-Mormon literature or the other literature that you were learning then? Okay, sorry. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. I learned a little bit about the temple and temple ordinances and stuff as well there, which did make it seem kind of cultish. I would talk to the bishop or, whatnot, to have a conversation. And I remember one day, one of the counselors in the bishopric in Daniel's ward named Steve, he met with my grandfather and I. We had lunch. We met together, him and I and my grandfather and my dad, and had lunch together. And my grandpa and my dad just kind of grilled him, on the church and the beliefs and, why would I brainwash? Why would they brainwash, a young guy and stuff like that? And how can they be sure and all these things? And definitely the Spirit was involved in that meeting, and it was a very guided. And I think that moment kind of separated things, and my family started seeing that I was really serious about this, and they started to see that Mormons weren't that bad after all. And I think they started to see like that a little bit more. So there weren't really a lot of challenges for me. They were things that were brought up, and it was kind of like interesting, but never really, I didn't read a whole bunch of literature. I read maybe 3 or 4 books. That was all. Some of them were just bad. And even, talking to Daniel now, who's kind of transitioned out of the faith now, has read some of those same books, and it's like, oh, this was kind of garbage, and this was, just hopped up, and there came a point where my grandfather, we'd meet up occasionally, and he'd give me a book. We'd trade. I'd give him back the one he had given me, and then I'd take the new one he was giving me. And there came one time where I just became bold, and I said, Grandpa, listen, I love you, and I know that you love me, and I know that you're just concerned, and this is why you're taking this time. I said, but I feel awful when I read this. I feel like sick in my stomach, and I feel I just feel icky. I said, but when I read the Book of Mormon, I don't feel that way at all. I feel quite the opposite. I feel very peaceful and good. I said, so I'm more than happy to read another book, but before I do, I need you to read this book first so that it's an even playing field. And I handed him a copy of the Book of Mormon. because I thought that it was only fair that if he was going to insist that I read these things and I learn of these things, I said, well, here's where I'm coming from, and this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm feeling. I want you to experience that too.
How did he do with that?
I think he was a bit taken back, and he just took it, and he's like, okay, and and then that was the end, and I never was handed any more literature, and we didn't.
So he didn't never read it.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, he may have picked it up, but I think he did.
How was just the story of Joseph Smith, the modern prophets, the first vision? How did that align with your beliefs, and how easy was that all to accept?
I thought certainly that was miraculous. And for me, because I could draw so many parallels from my own life, it didn't seem that out of the world to happen in a sense.
Yeah, you're reading the story of Joseph Smith and seeing yourself, huh?
Yeah, essentially. He was searching for truth, and I was like, that's what I was doing. And well, God answered him. And so, okay, God answers prayers, and he's there. This idea of the Trinity was always kind of confusing to me. And so this idea of the first vision, that God the Father and Jesus Christ as two separate and distinct beings, as it's canonized in the scripture, was very intriguing to me. Although reading the Book of Mormon and that account and later other accounts, it seemed to me that the Book of Mormon seemed far more Trinitarian than it did otherwise, which was kind of interesting to me.
Has that given you any pause, any questions? What have you done about that in your thought?
Not so much. I mean, because I took it from, well, Joseph Smith was around during this Second Great Awakening in the United States. The religious this is what he was familiar to him and what was known to him. So it makes sense that he would describe things in certain ways. And, me telling my conversion story over the years, it's been 16 years since I've been baptized. And, I know that sometimes the setting is different. And so I leave out certain details, right?
Wouldn't it be highly problematic, though, for Joseph translating the Book of Mormon to have his false beliefs about the nature of God or the Trinity seep into that work of Scripture? I mean, do you feel like some of those, based on what you just said, it sounds like what you're saying, that perhaps some of Joseph's misunderstandings, what he gathered from his churches that he visited, are present in the Book of Mormon, but that they are somehow false. Is that what you're saying, or what is it that you're suggesting with that?
I'm not saying necessarily that they are false, but that my reading of it seemed, it was interesting to me that it came across that way. But I believe in Joseph Smith's experience that he saw God the Father and Jesus Christ as separate and distinct, and I kind of had my own personal beliefs about that, and so I guess I just kind of put that on the back shelf and didn't really consider or think about it that much. Anyway, so I went through lots of missionaries, lots of discussion. I was kind of like, a lot of greenies, a lot of new missionaries came to the field and were serving in my area. And I was like the go-to person where they could practice their lessons because I'd had them a lot. Then fast forward to 2005, my senior year in high school. It was January. And I had been reading in the Book of Mormon. I was reading Lehi's dream, his vision, and how he just had partaken of the fruit, and he was beckoning his family to come unto him. And I had this thought that I need to pray. So I got down and prayed, and I was like, I don't know why I'm praying or why I feel like I need to, but I do. And I said, I know this is true. Can you soften my dad's heart? Can you make it possible that I can talk to him and that will listen and that he'll see the goodness of this in my life, and that is not a bad thing, kind of thing. And as I'm praying, I hear the garage door open. My dad is coming home from work. And so I was like, oh no, it's happening. And I kind of stayed in my room. My dad came in, and he kind of lounged around a little bit and got himself something to eat and whatnot and relaxed. And I was just kind of in my room, the door was closed, and I was just kind of psyching myself up, pumping myself up. Okay, this is fine. And so then finally I went to my dad and some small talk, asked him like how his day was and what he was doing. And, he was kind of watching some TV, and I said, hey, do you want to watch a show with me? And he's watching a movie with me. He's like, sure. Yeah, that's fine. And I was like, it's a church movie though, just so you know. And he's like, okay. I was like, but it's only 20 minutes. He's like, okay, sure. And so it was the restoration DVD, the restoration video. about Joseph Smith's first vision. And so we watched that, and I sat by my dad, and I know that he felt impressed. He was moved upon, whether that was by the acting or the story or a combination. He was certainly moved. And at the end, there's a scene of Joseph Smith, I think, baptizing his father or something. But at the end, I just turned to my dad and I said, "Dad, I know that this is right. I know that this is what I need to do. Will you please let me get baptized?" And with kind of tears in his eyes, he looked at me. He said, "Yeah, go for it." And we shared a sweet embrace and just kind of cried and hugged for a little bit. And then I kind of pulled away. I was like, "You're not joking, right? Because that'd be really cruel." And he kind of he said, "No, I'm serious. Go for it. If it means that much to you, I can see that it's a good thing, and so go for it." And so I did. The missionaries were the last one to know I was getting baptized. Everybody else. And so, okay, and you're gonna do the talk on this, and then you'll do this, and you do the song. So I called the missionaries up and was like, "Okay, so Saturday at 4, I want to get baptized. Here's the program. Is that gonna work?" And they're like, "What?" Excited. And it was very humbling because it had been 4 years that I had gone to church. I'd been able to meet a lot of people, and our stake center, it was if it was like a stake conference, it was packed. Our whole stake center for people coming to attend my baptism, and that again kind of made me feel like I'm home, I'm welcomed, and that's kind of the only thing that I wanted. So that is my my journey into.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that whole story from beginning to this point. I know it's not the end of your faith journey. We've just gotten to the beginning, really, of the faith journey. So I hope that you'll join me again soon, and we can discuss some of the things that you've learned over the last 16 years. And it was kind of a softball round with questions. I'd like to know what's been troubling for you, if anything, what has tried you over the years, what you've done about those trials. So I hope we can look forward to that kind of a conversation. But Joe, thanks so much for joining me. And we'll talk to you soon. In fact, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.